I absolutely have to plow through the remaining parts of the Twitter files. And for those who don't know what the Twitter files are, this is going to be now the fourth part overall. Basically, Elon Musk bought Twitter. You might have heard something about that. There were lots of people getting upset about it, lots of people losing their mind about it, lots of people were like, this is going to ruin Twitter, and of course, it was all hysteria. What they were really worried about was having somebody that was ideologically different to them come in and take over a piece of what is essentially state apparatus that we've subsequently find out, and what they might do and what they might reveal. Crucially, the journalistic class were fundamentally against it, not just because they're by and large DNC shills in the American media, but because obviously they could back channel to Twitter. That was a key component about why it was so important to them Twitter didn't change. Twitter employees and journalists were in cahoots. If you insulted a journalist on Twitter, your account would be banned. If you said learn to code to a journalist, your account would be banned. This didn't happen because a bunch of people Twitter got round the table and said learn to code is a dog whistle for something sinister. No, it happened because journalists cried to their friends who worked at Twitter. It got fed up the chain to Vijaya. Gaddy! And she decided, yes, we must absolutely do what we can to keep the journalists on side. We're going to need them round about election time. And so Twitter, what the Twitter files have exposed for me, and if you remember, you can go back and look at my videos. I don't think these were like any great revelations. I don't think these were things that were like, blockbusters. I saw a lot of people like Fox News journalists saying it's bombshells, bombshell revelations. The first few were pretty mild, honestly. And so what started happening now is as more and more releases has been happening, and just again, so you're aware how these are being released, is Elon Musk has given access to journalists he deemed to be outside of the DNC-controlled media apparatus, people he believes are neutral, and he's given those journalists access to go through the documents, go through emails, Slack chats, that type of thing, and basically, pull out anything they find interesting and present it in their reporting. And so what we've had is ultimately a number now of revelations as these have snowballed more and more, and the journalists have had longer and longer with the files themselves and with the emails and with the documentation. And what we found is ultimately what I told you probably 18 months to 2 years ago. Twitter was a Fed-infested shithole where not just the American government was spying on you, but the Saudi government, the Chinese government, all these governments were spying on you. And not just spying on you and gaining access to your data. In some cases, for reprisals that would then happen, like we saw with 2 Saudi Arabian women jailed, one for 35 years, one for 45 years, for criticism of the Saudi state, which was, on Twitter. What we've also seen now is the American government was feeding down the chain to Twitter employees and saying this account is saying something the government doesn't like, please censor it. And so I don't think, and I'm not a constitutional lawyer by any stripe, I don't think this, a lot of people have said this is a clear First Amendment violation. I don't think it's so clear. You would need constitutional legal experts to make a determination about that. What I do know is that if you pay your taxes to an entity of the government, that government then uses the taxes to pay Twitter to censor American taxpayers on their platform. There's something not quite right about that. And irrespective of whether or not it's a First Amendment violation, irrespective of whether or not it's proof, that Democrats are colluding with big tech or whatever it is, forget that. The reality is, in American history, a president has been impeached for less than this. Nixon, well, what happened at the Watergate scandal, that was simply, stealing documents and recording political competitors. And also, it's probably the most significant reveal of how the American intelligence community works against its own population since the Snowden story. So I think these are big deals in terms of what they mean. Not everyone shares that opinion. A lot of people are kind of, I think, a little bit jaded and kind of done with it all. But we'll get through all of these. So where we ended up last time was Trump being suspended. As you'll remember, Trump was removed from Twitter quite famously. We now know from revealed emails he didn't even violate the policy they claimed that he violated, or rather Twitter claimed he violated in their blog. We went over the blog and we read the tweets that they claimed were incitement to violence, which weren't incitement to violence, couldn't be interpreted as incitement to violence unless you were smoking crack. And so the next Twitter files was Bari Weiss, who weirdly had a falling out with Elon Musk around about this time, shortly after this, I believe, over the Elon Jet Tracker account. But that doesn't seem to have affected her access or ability to tweet and operate on Twitter and stuff like that. But she went into the specifics of the Trump removal and things that were being said internally at that time, which it's worth just kind of doing a little review before we get into the FBI infiltration aspect of this. So here you go. Twitter files number 5. On the morning of January 8th, President Donald Trump with one remaining strike before being at risk of a permanent suspension. Hilarious that they talk about strikes, like for fucking world leaders. And also, I just want to remind everybody, these are the people, right, that said Trump was a fascist dictator. He's a fascist dictator that can't even use his powers to get by Twitter TOS. Like, you do understand what happens in China. Like, so, and like, in Hong Kong, anti-government newspapers, police turn up there and shut it down. That's what fascism would look like if you lived under it. What Trump did was he tweeted things that weren't against the rules, got banned anyway, then cried about it on some shit Twitter knockoff that he made for himself. So, no, these things are not fascism. You can see the tweet we went over, the 75 million great patriots who voted will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form. And then he also pointed out, I will not be going to the inauguration on January 20th. I mean, why would he? He's a sore loser. Did that surprise anybody at all, You can see the blog that we went into. And this is where we start getting to the internal documentation and discussion. There were people who dissented about the idea of banning Donald Trump from Twitter on, among the Twitter employees. And you can see here, maybe it's because I'm from China, which, look, the irony is, of course, they did have Chinese operatives working at Twitter anyway that were censoring people on behalf of the Chinese government, but whatever. But maybe it's because I'm from China. I deeply understand how censorship can destroy the public conversation. I understand this fear, but I also think it's important to understand that censorship by a government is very different than censorship of the government. The First Amendment in the US and similar legislation in other countries with similar concepts exists specifically to prevent the government from silencing people. I respect that. That was a reply to that one. And I respect that, but realistically, we impose far stricter rules on effectively everyone else on the platform. We started labeling, restricting his tweets when they became a threat to democracy. This was the response, and seemed like that was our red line. Yesterday, he clearly attempted to overthrow our democratic system of government and showed no signs of remorse. If this is not a clear reason to suspend him, again, as an unhinged ruler attempting to subvert the most powerful democracy in the world, I'm not sure what would be. And this is where you see just how fucking divorced from reality a lot of these people were. Remember, those are the tweets. I'm not going to the inauguration, and no one's going to disrespect the 75 million people who voted for me. That's it. That's all he said. That's what got him suspended. That's him attempting to overthrow democracy, apparently. This is before we even get into the bigger travesties around January 6th. Obviously, for example, it's like apparently Trump was leading a coup, yet Trump wanted police to be there, and this was called off by Democrat politicians. Why? We don't know. Obviously, we've all seen the footage of police letting rioters into the Capitol building over choosing to defend it with force. I mean, perhaps this was a measure because they were worried about being overwhelmed if it escalated, because there weren't many police there, which brings us back to the question, why wasn't there just an armed blockade there? It would have stopped everything. Well, you know, I've got my own opinions about why that might be. I'm sure you do too. Anyway, after January 6th, Twitter employees organized to demand that the management of Twitter ban Trump. I'm still struggling to understand the decision not to ban Trump altogether, given he is inciting people to violence that has led to people being killed. Now, obviously, this was, you can see, the trending thing, delete his account. This is another January the 6th lie that has been repeated. It's being repeated by Democrat politicians now, that police died on January 6th at the Capitol building. Not true. If you've been told it's true, you've been lied to. It's absolutely not true. There was one officer that died a few days after, and that was Officer Sicknick, Brian Sicknick. But no, he fell ill. There was reports that he had been... The initial reports, which were repeated by the New York Times, CNN, MSNBC, were that Brian Sicknick had his head bashed in with a fire extinguisher. This was not true. It never happened. It was complete misinformation. In fact, they said he was taken out of dealing with the protesters after he got sprayed with some pepper spray, and then perhaps coincidentally, since we're big fans of that, 2 days later he fell ill and eventually had a stroke. So that's how he passed away. So you'll hear a lot about how people died on that day. The only person who died on that day was a MAGA person who was shot to death. So, you know, I've never understood the argument. It's not factually substantiated in any way, shape, or form that Trump incited violence and the violence led to people dying. None of that is true. Anyway, it continues. It feels like Twitter policy is engaged with someone acting in bad faith, and we won't acknowledge it. Do we have any belief that Trump will stop tweeting incitements to violence? If Alex Jones was shut down for get your battle rifles, he's far exceeded this standard. Now, again, he hasn't exceeded that standard. Alex Jones got banned. Well, I can't even remember if Alex Jones was already banned off Twitter because of the fucking, you know, his lawsuit and crazy shit he said. I'm pretty sure he was. But certainly Alex Jones had said something like, we're going down there on January 6th and you should get your battle rifles and all this. And he said it was metaphorical, and there's footage of him as well telling people, like, don't get embroiled in violence, don't fall for it, it's an FBI trap and all of this stuff. But, you know, Alex Jones has had a million strikes and, you know, has been unpersoned across almost every platform long before this, so largely irrelevant. The point is, Trump in no way exceeded the standard, didn't say get your battle rifles or anything even close to it. I think a lot of employees must share these concerns. Is there any channel or group where we can organise action? There's a lot of employee advocacy happening both here and in this other channel. I understand he was our president, and that may have been the reason why we were hesitant to do it. And that may have been the reason why we were hesitant to ban him. But I think come January 20th, there is absolutely no excuse why his account shouldn't be suspended for good. And yeah, so that was their take on it. You can see as well more hysteria in the Slack channels. This last sentence, we have to do the right thing here and ban this account. And they just do that thing that fucking leftoids do, where they fucking just repeat something as if that makes it any more true or any more significant. The only thing that surprises me there isn't the fucking clapping hand emoji between each word. We don't have a good track record of acting on his account, except in the clearest and most explicit of cases. In my opinion, extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary leadership. It took 3 years, but yeah, I've lost faith. Actual votes, Donald Trump Republican Party, 46.9%, 74,223,744. I don't really know why that's relevant at all, but I second this. Is pretty obvious he's going to try and thread the needle of incitement while not violating the rules. So even when they admit that he's gonna not violate the rules, so we have to ban him because he's going to not violate the rules. Okay, cool, that makes sense. Excellent moderation there. Bari continues. In the early afternoon of January 8th, the Washington Post published an open letter signed by over 300 Twitter employees to CEO Jack Dorsey demanding Trump's ban. We must examine Twitter's complicity in what President-elect Biden has rightly termed an insurrection. That's the WAPO there. But the Twitter staff assigned to evaluate tweets quickly concluded Trump had not violated Twitter's policies. I think we'd have a hard time saying this is incitement, said one staffer. It's pretty clear he's saying the American patriots are the one who voted for him and not the terrorists. We can call them that, right? From Wednesday. Indeed, yeah, because there weren't 75 million at the Capitol building. That's the clue. Another staffer agreed, saying, I don't see the incitement angle here. You can see as well, 3 sentences. I don't see the incitement of fit. What PC, probable cause, would it be trying to incite fear about? This is a Twitter policy writer, Anika Navaroli, said, I'm also not seeing a clear or coded incitement in the Donald Trump tweet. I'll respond in the elections channel and say that our team has assessed and found no violation for that one. She goes on and does just that. Safety has assessed that tweet above and determined it is not in violation of our policies at this time. And then later, Navaroli would be pulled in for the January 6th committee. I'll have to do a video about that because it was a farce. It was a classic fucking show trial where it was just designed to be a pity party for Democrats, Republicans that wanted to keep their political capital up by denouncing Trump. And, it had no real authority, no real power, and achieved absolutely nothing. But anyway, later Navaroli would testify at that committee and say, for months, I'd been begging and anticipating and attempting to raise the reality that if we made no intervention into what I saw occurring, people were going to die. So in other words, she essentially misrepresented her feelings publicly at a political committee where she was under oath and compelled to tell the truth simply because she didn't want, in the eyes of public opinion, for people to know she actually truthfully assessed that Donald Trump hadn't broken any of the rules on Twitter. Next, Twitter's safety team decides that Trump's early morning ET tweet is also not in violation. They are unequivocal. It's a clear non-violation. It's just to say he's not attending the inauguration. To understand Twitter's decision to ban Trump, we must consider how Twitter deals with other heads of state and political leaders, including Iran, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. In June 2018, Iran's Ayatollah Ali Khamenei tweeted, Israel is a malignant, cancerous tumor in the West Asian region that has to be removed and eradicated. It is possible and it will happen. Now, remember, I told you about this on previous videos. This is the type of thing that Twitter allowed. Now, that's an incitement to violence, pretty clear. It's also anti-Semitic, pretty clear. And yet, that wasn't banned. That wasn't banned. Twitter reviewed it. They were aware of it. They basically said, oh, no, he's a head of state, so we've got to let him say ridiculous things like that. Then you have, in October 2020, the former Malaysian Prime Minister said it was a right for Muslims to kill millions of French people based on their massacres of the past. Twitter did delete that tweet for glorifying violence, but didn't choose to ban Dr. Mahathir Mohamad there for that. Again, a very clear and obvious incitement to violence, and one that came at a particularly tumultuous time. Frictions between communities that we're seeing happen again in France at the moment. You can see as well, Muhammadu Buhari, the president of Nigeria, incited violence against pro-Biafra groups. Those of us in the fields for 30 months who went through the war will treat them in the language they understand. The politics of revenge, of course. Now, Twitter deleted that tweet, but also chose not to ban Muhammadu Buhari because he's the president of Nigeria and he's a political figure, and it's important to know what political figures are saying. On October 2021, Twitter allowed the Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed to call on citizens to take up arms against the Tigray region, and you can see there the tweet remained up. It's still there, even though it now says it banned abusive behavior. It was up at the time, and they didn't ban the account. In February 2021, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, his government threatened to arrest Twitter employees in India and to incarcerate them for up to 7 years after they restored hundreds of accounts that had been critical of him. Yes, they do this in India too. And Twitter decided they weren't going to ban Modi or take any action about those threats. So assess all of that and understand Twitter did decide to ban Trump and ban Trump for not inciting violence because of pressure from the American media machine and the American government, or rather the incoming American government and the intelligence community, let's say, which are very partisan right now. Less than 90 minutes after Twitter employees had determined that Trump's tweets were not in violation, Vijaya Gadde, there she is again. Remember, I've said every time, everything flows up to her. Twitter's head of legal policy and trust asked whether it could, in fact, be coded incitement. Now, this is one of the things that I've railed against for years. It's why I never got on board with this idea of fucking dog whistles, right? What annoys me is American academia has spent the last 10, 15 years coming up with language to describe things that don't exist except in the minds of the academic, and only the academic is smart enough to see it, you know? Shit like, it's a dog whistle. Well, how the fuck can you hear it then if you're not the dog it's intended for, you know? But, and so there's loads of stuff like this. So this idea of, well, he didn't break the rules, he didn't say anything bad, but could it be coded? Could it be coded? And you can see, thanks. The big question is whether a tweet like this one this morning from Trump, which isn't a rule violation on its face, when she's head of policy, she makes the rules, she said it wasn't a violation, is being used as coded incitement to further violence. If you have any context or insight we should consider, I'm all ears. You know, for example, use of term American patriot and they will not be disrespected or treated unfairly in any way, shape, or form. Follow-up there is, this is an interesting question. I'm going to speak to my team ASAP, see if we can run a quick survey to get reactions to the language contained in the tweet and get back to you. And then Vijaya says, I'm not sure I would rely on a survey. I worry how that would be perceived externally. A few minutes later, Twitter employees on the scaled enforcement team suggested that Trump's tweet may have violated Twitter's glorification of violence policy, but only if you interpret the phrase American patriots to refer to the rioters. Now remember, he said American patriots, 75 million of them. There was about 1,000 people that invaded the Capitol in, you know, not a coup, not an insurrection, just a riot, just a modest act of arguable domestic terrorism. You can see they go in. Another team is asking if we would consider the Trump tweet for Gov, if we consider American patriots, that's glorification of violence, GOV. If we consider American patriots to refer to the rioters, they have a point. From my point of view, at least, they said they understand our position, but will continue to push their glorification of violent assessment with leadership. They see it that he is the leader of a violent extremist group who is glorifying the group and its recent actions. So just a nice, regular, reasonable conclusion to arrive at. Trump is the head of an extremist group now. Things escalate from there. Members of that team came to view him as the leader of a terrorist group responsible for violence deaths comparable to the Christchurch shooter or Hitler. And on that basis, and on the totality of his tweets, he should be deplatformed. Just to update you, I spoke to Redacted just now. They understand our assessment of this individual tweet, but they now view him as the leader of a terrorist group responsible for violence or deaths comparable to the Christchurch shooter or Hitler. And on that basis, and on the totality of his tweets, he should be deplatformed. They will continue to push that argument with leadership, and we'll see where it fails. So I don't really know where to begin with debunking that. You know, it's pretty absurd on its face that this is the assessment of Donald Trump as a political figure. First of all, to compare him to someone that went into a mosque and massacred Muslims at prayer, unarmed Muslims at prayer, I think that's reprehensible. You'll see all the time, you know, when people compare certain political happenings to massacres and, historically significant genocides. People say it's really distasteful. But, of course, if you get leftoid privilege, then, you're allowed to fucking do things like that. To me, that really, first of all, it diminishes the tragedy of Christchurch. And then second of all, I mean, Trump support, even the supporters in the Capitol building didn't shoot anyone, didn't kill anyone. Absolutely outrageous. But then just kick it up a notch and fucking throw Hitler out there. I mean, in what way would January 6th be comparable to any of the atrocities Hitler perpetrated? It's just mind-boggling stuff. But that was Twitter's internal official stance. 2 hours later, Twitter executives host a 30-minute all-staff meeting with Jack Dorsey and Vijaya Gadde answering staff questions as to why Trump hadn't been banned yet. But this only makes the employees angrier. Multiple tweeps, that is what they call Twitter employees, have quoted the banality of evil, suggesting that people implementing our policies are like Nazis following orders, said Yoel Roth to a colleague. And again, you can see the chat there. It says, I've been keeping an eye on it. Candidly, not a lot of people who are close to the decisions would feel safe engaging in that town hall. Multiple tweets have quoted the banality of evil, suggesting our policies are like Nazis following orders, which is someone responsible for our policies who had direct family members in Auschwitz. Is not exactly an environment I want to wade into. People are angry and want to express themselves, but the way the conversation happens can close off meaningful engagement. Dorsey requested simpler language to explain Trump's suspension. Roth wrote, God help us, this makes me think he wants to share it publicly. So in other words, Roth was angry that Jack might be publicly transparent with the decision to ban Trump, because obviously you're going to have to explain it. You're banning a president. 1 hour later, Twitter announced Trump's permanent suspension due to the risk of further incitement of violence. Twitter users were ecstatic. Of course, we can get some of the cringe. You can see it's OMG, exclamation points, this one on the right here, it says, this feels like a piece of history. It is! Saw the message. Thank you, everyone, for your impactful work this week. I'm very proud to work and learn from you every day. Wishing you a good weekend. And congratulatory big props to whoever in trust and safety is sitting there whack-a-moling the Trump accounts. By the next day, employees expressed eagerness to tackle medical misinformation as soon as possible. So obviously remember the backdrop of this. This was when COVID was happening, and there had been a number of people that were, and listen, so there is a broad spectrum of people on the opposite side of the COVID argument. There are people that spread out-and-out misinformation that was dangerous. There are people who are skeptical of government narratives, especially when governments are giving Big Pharma incredible, unprecedented protections, while simultaneously mandating for a product they sell. Right? There are also highly trained medical professionals that have their own scientific opinions about things. But unfortunately, what ended up happening was if you weren't triple vax, mask all the time, safe and effective, believe the science, lol, Joe Rogan's eating horse dewormer, if you weren't there, then you were lumped in with everybody else on the other side. And what was worrying for me at that time is I saw, I'm not even talking about the doctors that are going on Fox News regurgitating false statistics. I'm talking about there are doctors who were just simply saying things like, if the VAERS reporting is to be believed, this vaccine probably should be temporarily pulled until we get a better handle on how accurate these numbers are. That was enough for Twitter to ban you. Twitter were removing, expert cardiologists, expert virologists, expert vaccinologists. They were having their accounts, completely removed. I mean, remember, Brett Weinstein found himself fall afoul of this, and I've followed Brett Weinstein on this channel for a long time, ever since we did the Richard Lewis episode entitled Evergreen, which for me was sort of like the perfect encapsulation of everything that was crazy happening in America in the culture war time, and how academia was really losing its way. And Brett Weinstein isn't just, a scientist, but specifically, he's a virologist that had worked with bats and had harvested, novel coronaviruses from bats. So, for his opinion to be like just so readily discounted by Twitter employees, like, what's your expertise? An evolutionary biologist, not virologist. Yeah, evolutionary biologist. My bad. But he had experience just before the coronavirus, before COVID-19, where he'd been working with bats and novel coronaviruses and stuff. I can't even remember where it was in the world, but he went out to the jungle and was in the caves with the bats. But anyway, bottom line is that, he doesn't even make any great claims to be a particular expert in that field. But people, he when he did his Dark Horse podcast, loads of people were pushing back against that. And it just seems to me like incredible that if expertise flies contrary to public narrative or journalistic consensus, we ignore the expertise. Now, we never used to do that. It's an incredibly dangerous road to go down, I think. So Twitter, yes, that was going to be their next. We've got Trump. What can we do now? Oh, well, there's that Alex Berenson account, right? We can go after that. And you can see somebody had said we should get on to medical misinformation. And they said, yes, we absolutely plan to do this in 2021. With the timeline being as soon as possible. COVID is one specific disease, but medical misinformation is a much broader category of harmful content. We've laid a lot of the groundwork for policy and product behavior through our work on COVID and the election. The misinformation policy team in TNS, along with the folks in Health Experience, TWS Research, and other teams across the company, are now focused on getting to a place of improved maturity in how our policies are actualized. We'll have more to share on this soon. Now, what's also, this is how it's got fuck all to do with actually caring about medical misinformation and everything to do with doing the government's bidding, is think about, right, how much medical bullshit do you think you've read on an average day on the internet? And by medical bullshit, I mean, marijuana cures cancer, right? Things like that. Think on an average day what you'll come across. Think about how journalists routinely misinterpret scientific papers and routinely misinterpret. Put it this way. You can pick up a newspaper and read an article where it'll go, scientists now say eating 40 rashers of bacon a day will prevent cancer. And you'll go, what? That can't be right. Well, whatever. And you get on with your day, and then it turns out actually what happened was, it was a study in burnt bacon and carcinogens causing cancer. But what they found was if people, that for some reason, there was an outlier. If people ate 40 rashers, it didn't significantly impact the cancer statistics. So, in other words, it's inconclusive. But that's not how the journalists report it. There's a cure for cancer every week being touted in the press. A cure for AIDS being touted. I've lost track, by the way, how many times I've seen a woman miraculously cured of AIDS in Africa, and then you read it and it's just their T cells just came back to a non-HIV level and they function life normally, which is a sort of aberration that can happen with antiviral treatment. So, no one cares about any of that misinformation, right? Nobody gives a shit. Journalists get scientific papers wrong all the fucking time. They're not mentally equipped. They're not experts in the field, and they get it wrong all the time. And that's the norm. And what you're supposed to do is go, yeah, but that's bullshit though. Right? Yeah, but that's bullshit though. Yeah, exactly. Coffee's good for you 1 week, stops cancer 1 week, stops cirrhosis. The next week, actually, you have a higher instance of prostate cancer or whatever it is, or linked to heart disease. Which one is it? It's all over the place, and nobody cares. So why is COVID the one disease that you're not allowed to be wrong about? Interesting, isn't it? So when they talk about medical misinformation being this broad category, I see people claiming fucking weed cured my brain tumor all the time. I did 500 bong hits and then the tumor fell out of my brain. It's all nonsense. Like, those fucking legalized weed crew just talk that shit so they can just smoke a bowl without going to prison. So for the longest time, Twitter's stance was that we weren't the arbiter of truth, wrote another employee, which I respected, but it never gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. Oh, they want to be the arbiter of truth. By the way, this is one day I am going to sit down and write a comprehensive book about the moderation spectrum and how basically all moderators start with good intentions. They realize how shit moderation is. They go crazy and then they demand power and always want to be the arbiters of what's real, what's true, what's allowed, and what isn't. But anyway, this message here, very excited to see us handling more categories of misinformation. Excited to do it. For the longest time, Twitter's stance was that we aren't the arbiter of truth, which I respected, but it never gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling. That said, my dad is an MD, and medical misinformation is a really hard topic. Even for COVID-19, we only covered a narrow category of information. As an example, is take vitamin C, vitamin D, elderberry, and xylitol daily to reduce COVID-19 risk good information? Is that creative marketing or misinformation? Personally, I'm not sure, and I suspect there are views on both sides. Well, listen, people were getting banned for saying take vitamin D. All the people at the start who said there seems to be, the early studies suggest that there's a link to vitamin D deficiency and COVID fatalities, they all got suspended. I don't even know where we're at scientifically with that right now, but that was one school of thought. The whole thing you were meant to do was take, what they were saying initially in the very first few weeks of it. They said vitamin D and zinc was what they came up with. If you lay your hands on that. And I'll be honest, by the way, during COVID, which I've had probably, like I said, I suspect the last time, it's 3 times. I think the cold I had at Christmas wasn't COVID. I think that I didn't test positive. I tested once. I couldn't be asked. The last time I had COVID, by the way, the 3rd time I had COVID, I tested positive I tested negative on the 1st day. I tested negative on the 2nd day. I tested positive on the 3rd day. Felt better by the 4th. Tested positive and then was clean. I don't even know what that was. I don't even know if they were like false positives or whatever. But yeah, I got jabbed twice, COVID 3 times, and then had the seasonal flu at Christmas. Put it this way, I've had more colds and flus in the last since 2020. That I probably had in the previous 10 years. I never used to get sick. And yeah, that's what I think. It probably was some mild strain of COVID. I feel like COVID's the only thing that's out there trying to get you. But it's just all the it's so far removed from the original thing that you're testing for. It just doesn't fucking flag. But whatever. So I probably had 4, if we're being honest. But 3 I know of. Well, whatever. COVID. Love it. Anyway, next. Twitter's COO Parag Agrawal, now no longer with the company, obviously, told the head of security, Mudge Zatko, I think a few of us should brainstorm the ripple effects of Trump's ban. Centralized content moderation, in my opinion, has reached a breaking point now. Now, if you don't know who Parag Agrawal was, Parag was somebody that he wasn't as out of the bullshit as Jack Dorsey, but he was also the person who, when Elon Musk first said they were gonna buy Twitter, he was the guy that was trying to smooth over all the cracks and let all the staff know it's gonna be okay. I don't think he's that bad. Think about Tesla, etc., etc. But yeah, anyway, he said, I think a few of us should brainstorm these ripple effects and how we might adapt. Mudge Zatko said, well, what are you suggesting? By the way, Mudge is the whistleblower that went to Congress, and you can watch his, it's a super long video. What he talks about is that Twitter misrepresented the security on their systems. And yes, foreign governments did have access to the information about private Americans, but not only that, the security measures were trash. In fact, if you know what's been going on behind the scenes, which I'll put it into my from Musk till dawn video, there's a database that has something information about 210 million Twitter users or something ridiculous being sold privately on hacking forums right now. And apparently it's changed hands 5 times. So that they absolutely fucking sold you down the river in terms of security. No one really knows how bad it is, but they certainly lied about it to the American government. Anyway, back to these ripple effects. Parag answered, not sure, but the future of public conversation feels uncertain to me now. To my mind, we need to move fast towards opening up control over policies and enforcement and decentralizing it, because centralized content moderation has reached a breaking point. I think more important questions are the future of public conversation. In my mind, this is the end of the road for centralized content moderation. It's hard to believe that this approach will be sustainable moving forward. I suggested to Mudge a few of us get together to try and anticipate ripple effects and decide how we want to change things as we move ahead. And so obviously, yeah, I mean, love him, hate him, dislike him, agree with him, disagree with him, you know, he does have a point here. What does it say about a system where you have a website that is so fundamentally important to the government's goals, just to the goals of journalists, to so many different entities, but let's just focus on the government. You run a website that is so important to the government's goals, and yet because of that, you wield disproportionate power over the government to the point where you can silence a sitting president, ban them, and there will be absolutely zero repercussions, despite the fact you like to LARP about living in a fascist state. So, you know, he's right. Like, the idea of what he means by decentralizing it is that, like, it sort of has to go over to the people. It can't just be a group of people, a centralized group of people making these decisions, because it's untenable. It's absurd at its face, and also, of course, is going to bring back ramifications. The Republicans have taken the House. They're going to create committees and subcommittees that are just going to be all up in the old Twitter employee shit now for the next 2 years. And by the way, it's all political theatre. It's all for show. Nothing will change. Nothing will happen. No one will go to prison. No, you know, it's going to be a joke. It's like this weaponizing of the intelligence community church committee they've set up. Church-style committee. It's going to go nowhere. It's a waste of everyone's time. It's so politicians can grandstand and look good and use their oratory skills and maybe enhance their chances of re-election, or maybe even a run at president. That's all it is. On we go. Outside the United States, Twitter's decision to ban Trump raised alarms. Even President Emmanuel Macron was upset about it. Macron, who seemed totally okay with sending in the police to brutalize peaceful protesters during the Yellow Jacket protests, which were completely valid. When Paris was on fire for weeks and the press pretended it wasn't happening because he is one of their own. Remember, Barack Obama went and campaigned for him, didn't he? Even he said Twitter had gone too far. Joining him was obviously Angela Merkel, and even Mexico's President Andrés Manuel López Obrador. Macron told an audience he didn't want to live in a democracy where the key decisions were being made by private players. I want it to be decided by a law voted by your representative or by regulation, governance, democratically discussed and approved by democratically elected leaders. Merkel's spokesperson called Twitter's decision to ban Trump from its platform problematic and added that the freedom of opinion is of elementary significance. The Russian opposition leader, Alexei Navalny, obviously persecuted by Putin, criticized the ban as an unacceptable act of censorship. And whether you agree with Navalny and Macron or the executives at Twitter, we hope this latest installment of the Twitter Files gave you insight into that unprecedented decision. Barry Weiss editorializes there and then links to her Substack, which is now called The Free Press. It used to be called Common Sense. They've now scaled up. It's been an incredible success story. I think it's the most read Substack on Substack, although Matt Taibbi's probably breathing down her neck right now. They scaled up to the point where they can employ writers, and they now are a publication called The Free Press. So next up, part 6. We're back with Matt Taibbi. Twitter, the FBI subsidiary. That was the Trump man. We know that was bogus. Anyone, again, who tells you, but he was inciting violence. You've seen the tweets, you've seen the evidence. Not even Twitter thought that. So, again, you can just discount these idiots from your life. You can just get rid of them. But he was inciting violence on Twitter. You're a moron. On we go with our lives. Don't talk to the morons. So anyway, this is part 6, the FBI subsidiary. This is about how the intelligence community had, over a period of time, infiltrated Twitter. And of course, as we know, the FBI has been hugely partisan towards the Democrat side of the equation ever since Trump got elected. In fact, there have been people removed from their positions within the FBI because they've actively said, don't worry, we're going to find evidence, we'll get rid of Trump, etc. Let's get into it. Twitter's contact with the FBI was constant and pervasive, as if it were a subsidiary. Between January 2020 and November 2022, there were over 150 emails between the FBI and former Twitter Trust and Safety Chief Yoel Roth. Some are mundane, like San Francisco agent Elvis Chan wishing Roth a Happy New Year, along with a reminder to attend our quarterly call next week. Others are requests for information into Twitter users related to active investigations. Now, a few things to set the table before we get into this, because I know some people, again, don't think this is a big deal. And obviously, just so you know, naturally, if you operate in the United States and you have information on users, and those users are part of an FBI investigation, a legitimate law enforcement investigation, you're compelled. You have to cooperate if they provide the accurate documentation and the requests. What you certainly don't have to do is be cozy with the FBI to the degree they're wishing you happy fucking New Year, and you certainly don't have to comply with requests that are not part of ongoing investigations, nothing to do with investigations, and equally the FBI misrepresenting what is an investigation. You should be guarded about that if you're protecting users' data and have an obligation to them. And you should be saying, look, without a court order or whatever it is, we're not going to comply with that. So you have to go back and get the proper paperwork. So where I'm at is, again, I knew this was going on. It's not shocking to me, but to dismiss it and say an FBI back-channeling to a senior person at Twitter and getting them to delete tweets, not because you're breaking the law, not because they're investigating you, not because there's an immediate risk of harm or blowing an FBI investigation or any of that other stuff, but simply because the government doesn't like what you're saying. No, this has to be problematic. You cannot possibly support that unless you truly are a bootlicker. Anyway, on we go. But surprisingly, a high number of requests by the FBI for Twitter to take action on election misinformation, even involving joke tweets from low-follower accounts. The FBI's social media-focused task force, known as FTIF, created in the wake of the 2016 election, what a surprise, the one the Dems lost, swelled to 80 agents and corresponded with Twitter to identify alleged foreign influence and election tampering of all kinds. Now, by the way, spoiler, it's now being published. It's now okay to say this, guys. You won't get banned or called a Trump supporter. That, yeah, turns out there was no Russian interference with the election. All those Facebook accounts they had, all those Twitter accounts, yeah, absolute minimal impact, if any at all. That's all now being published, by the way, with studies and research. It's all backed up with quantitative data. It's all there. It's all okay to say it. But back then in 2016, you had to believe it. I remember one of the saddest things that ever happened to me in esports was I was at an after party, and it was one of those after parties that were the kind of after party that it's the after party within the after party. It's where all the old veterans and all the old soaks go. So everybody that was at this party was good people, like people I liked, people I'd known for decades, like almost close to 2 decades, old school people, people that had done incredible things in esports. And we were sat there having a drink, and naturally at the time, as it always did, it got round to Trump. I don't know why people do this or did this, but for some reason, even in polite conversation, Trump was just something that would come up, even though it was a hugely divisive topic. And just common decency tells you, avoid politics, avoid religion, avoid sports. Like these are the things that drive people crazy. But no. And I remember talking to somebody, they literally, and this was somebody I knew and somebody I liked, and they literally were saying over and over and over again that, they were ashamed to be American because America was being puppeted by Putin, that actually the American government now was working for Putin. The Russians had won without even shooting a bullet. They'd won a war and all this stuff. And it was just like, it wasn't even that late in the night that it was like deranged drunk talk. It was it was early by after party standards. And this guy was just fucking saying that, like, openly. And I was going, yeah, but you don't really believe, based on a few Facebook accounts, that Vladimir Putin. And they go, oh no, it goes deeper than that. They funded all of Trump's campaign. They funded Trump's campaign. Yeah, this is, and I'm going, you don't believe this, do you? Like, there's no evidence for this. Yes, there is. And it was just really fucking sad. You know, I don't talk to that person no more because they're mental. You know, they're mental. Like, there's no point. Like, it's not even the same person anymore. It was like, I can't even remember who was. I was talking about it with Stephen the other day. You know, like the saddest thing about like the last few years. You know, the Trump years, Brexit years, fucking 2020 insurrection years, COVID years. You just watched people like lose their minds. Like people you knew, people like the fucking body snatchers. You know, just he's gone, she's gone, they're gone. All gone, you know. You just had to watch, and they're gone. They're not coming back. By the way, they're legitimately fucked. The way the media works and social media works, and this barrage of bullshit that you deal with, you would actually have to deprogram them. Like they need to be they need to be given medical care, and they need to be deprogrammed. It's the only way. Like, unfortunately, like as far as I can tell. As if you genuinely believe that the Kremlin funded Trump's campaign because he was a political asset that they recruited in the 80s, because they had Compromat on him, which was a tape of him going to a hotel President Obama slept in and paying women to piss on the bed and filming it. Like, if you believe any of this, like, you're fucked. Like, you know, this is like it's so mental, but people do, you know. Remember, even though that would be a conspiracy theory, if Republicans said that about Obama or something, right? It would be a dangerous conspiracy theory that you'd be investigated by the police for if you repeated it in polite conversation. A TV network gave Tom Arnold a TV show. You know, The Hunt for the Trump Tapes is what it was called. Just to show you how fucking mental it was. Tom Arnold is going to find the P tape. This is 2018. This is like 2 years into a Trump presidency. The Hunt for the Trump Tapes with Tom Arnold explained. Tom Arnold suggests that Mark Burnett is hiding the PP tape for Trump. Everything you need to know. Well, it's 404, but anyway, that was Vice. It said everything you need to know about the Hunt for the Trump Tapes with Tom Arnold. So this is how mental it was. I mean, Tom Arnold is a mentally ill man anyway. You know, like, not quite Keith Olbermann levels, but, you know, bad. They're just handing out TV shows for people to go and indulge in mentally ill delusions. And people are absorbing this shit. Right? And it's impacting on people. And like I say, it's no wonder your box is fucking blown out. Because anybody that, like, doesn't soberly sit down and go, mate, there are no PP tapes, obviously. Like, the best part about that as well is if you go look at the story, that came from the Steele dossier. And there was a leak on 4chan which showed somebody had written that exact fan fiction years before anyone knew what the Steele dossier was. And the presumption was that 4chan fan fiction about Trump lying on a bed and rolling around in the piss, saying Obama's so filthy and all this, right? That was like meant to be what Steele had brought in as intelligence into the dossier. That's how mental it is. Like, it's so crazy how fucking divorced from reality any of it is. And again, just don't bother with people like that. If people are incapable of understanding what actually happened in 2016, then, you know, just fine, go. If people think the election was rigged in 2016, but then absolutely, if you say the 2020 election was rigged, you should be in prison because you're a terrorist, they're mentally ill. Like, you can't help them. Like, they're gone. Just be kind, but also be kind to yourself. And don't talk to people like that. Anyway, on we go. Federal intelligence and law enforcement reach into Twitter included the Department of Homeland Security, which partnered with security contractors and think tanks to pressure Twitter to moderate content. It's no secret the government analyzes bulk data for all sorts of purposes, everything from tracking terror suspects to making economic forecasts. The Twitter files show something new. Agencies like the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security regularly sending social media content to Twitter through multiple entry points pre-flagged for moderation. What stands out is the sheer quantity of reports from the government Some are aggregated from public hotlines. You can see there an example, FBI El Paso. An unanswered question. Do agencies like the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security do in-house flagging work themselves, or do they farm it out? You have to prove to me that inside the fucking government you can do any kind of massive data or AI search, says one former intelligence officer. Hello, Twitter contacts. The master canine quality of the FBI's relationship, he means obviously the FBI is the master, Twitter is the dog in the relationship, comes through in this November 2022 email in which FBI San Francisco is notifying you it wants action on 4 accounts. And you can see, there it is, FBI San Francisco is telling you, Twitter, a private company, we want these 4 accounts dealt with. We want you to deal with them. Twitter personnel in that case went on to look for reasons to suspend the 4 accounts. These include from MA, whose tweets are almost all jokes. And this is a sample below. Here it is. This was a tweet the FBI decided was important enough to gain action, to take action against. Proposed container ship if there's a worldwide recession. This is the type of thing that From MA posts, but From MA decided that he had posted civic misinformation. Just to show the FBI can be hyper-intrusive in both directions, they also asked Twitter to review a blue-leaning account for a different joke, except here it was even more obvious that Claire Foster, PhD, who kids a lot, was kidding. The FBI email again says, hey, hello, Twitter contacts. FBI San Francisco is notifying you of the below activities which may potentially constitute violations of Twitter's terms of service. Remember, you're the FBI, and this is how you're spending your time, telling Twitter, we've seen a bad tweet that may be against your TOS. And we, the FBI, think you should deal with it. Well, let's have a look. And remember, these were Dems. Let's have a look what the feds thought was actionable this time. Here it is. I'm a ballot counter in my state. If you're not wearing a mask, I'm not counting your vote. Hashtag safety first. And then they followed that up with, for every negative comment on this post, I'm adding another vote for the Democrats. Right? That's funny, by the way. Now, if you were a Republican and you made a similar joke, Twitter would have banned you anyway, and the FBI wouldn't need to get involved. But that was deemed so dangerous that the FBI wanted Twitter to remove it and sanction the user. Anyone who cannot discern obvious satire from reality has no place making decisions for others or working for the feds, said Claire Foster when she was told. Of the 6 accounts mentioned in the previous 2 emails, all but Claire Foster and From MA were suspended. In an internal email from November 5th, 2022, the FBI's National Election Command Post, which complies and sends on complaints, said the San Francisco field office a long list of accounts that may warrant additional action. I don't know if there's any notable accounts there. I'll have a quick scan. I can't remember, but generally they seem to be non-celebrities at this point, although watch this space. Agent Chan passed this list on to his Twitter folks. So remember, Agent Elvis Chan is the guy that we know was regularly having lunch with Yoel Roth. Twitter then replied with its list of actions taken. No mercy was shown to the actor Billy Baldwin. Billy Baldwin was on one of the lists they sent in. Many of the above accounts were satirical in nature. Nearly all, with the exception of Baldwin and the RSB network, were relatively low engagement, and some were suspended, most with a generic "thanks Twitter" letter. When told of the FBI flagging, Lexi Tolia replied, my thoughts initially include 1, seems like prima facie First Amendment violation, 2, holy cow, me, an account with the reach of an amoeba, and 3, what else are they looking at? Another user that was suspended on behalf of Twitter for the FBI said, I can't believe the FBI is policing jokes on Twitter. That's crazy. In a letter to former Deputy General Counsel and former top FBI lawyer Jim Baker on September 16, 2022, the legal exec Stacia Cardile outlines results from her soon-to-be weekly meeting with the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, FBI, and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Weekly meetings, guys. Good news. We're going to do so much bidding for the feds. We're going to do it on a week. And not just the feds, other parts of the federal government, not just the FBI. You can see that she talks about how there is now a government industry sync, saying, I participated in our monthly, soon-to-be weekly, 90-minute meeting. And a few things to note. Foreign adversaries are amplifying themes being advanced by domestic actors to undermine the legitimacy of the election. Yeah, those evil foreign adversaries. Russians, of course, is what they're saying. I explicitly asked if there were any impediments with the ability of the government to share classified information or other relevant information with industry. FBI was adamant that no impediments to information sharing existed. The Department of Homeland Security has created a chart of key dates in the election process at the state level. They are confirming information with the states this week and should get us a summary chart of key dates next week. Policy tweeted about the meeting without legal review. As the only Twitter representative to speak, I raised my disappointment in the lack of involvement directly with policy comms. It was a missed opportunity to document some key points in this moving forward. They talk about something called Project Heron, which is, again, something they're doing around trust and safety policy. They also talk about escalations and how they handled, they responded to the Department of Homeland Security regarding information on a Facebook operation. They worked with Angela to try and get this terrible impersonation account spewing 9/11 conspiracy theories, impersonating a DCCC staffer whose dad died on 9/11. By the way, blows the mind, doesn't it? So it's a federal interest. Someone's out there lying about losing a family member in 9/11. I mean, Santos just did that Republican dude. He literally just did that. Lied on Twitter, said he lost his mother on 9/11. Although, benefit of the doubt, people are now kind of backpedaling, saying, oh, but she didn't die in the towers. She died as a result of the inhalation of all the toxic fumes and everything. But also, you have the fucking January the 6th lies being perpetrated out front and center repeatedly over and over again. Brave people died on January 6th, worse than Pearl Harbor, worse than 9/11. Because we were attacked by our own. Worst thing since the Civil War. No one died. No one died. The Lincoln Project is not pleased. Their video was labeled under SAMM. I believe that's when they put it on, it's mature content thing. So anyway, Lords working with the feds. This passage underscores the unique one big happy family vibe between Twitter and the FBI. And what other firm would the FBI blithely agree to no impediments to classified information? At the bottom of the letter, she lists a series of escalations which she raised. We just looked at those. About one, she writes, flagged a specific tweet on Illinois use of modems to transmit election results is possible violation of the civic integrity policy. Another internal letter from January 2021 shows Twitter execs processing an FBI list of possible violative content tweets. Here too, most tweets contain the same get out there and vote on Wednesday trope and had low engagement. This is what the FBI is spending their time on. This was a tweet the FBI deemed worthy of investigation, worthy of back-channeling and contacting Twitter. This is our future, guys. If the Dems get full control, if you are in Georgia, you better vote Wednesday. So encouraging people to vote Republican now was deemed to be potentially violative in the eyes of the FBI, a non-partisan organization. In this March 2021 email, an FBI liaison thanks a senior Twitter exec for the chance to speak to you and the team, and then delivers a packet of products. The executive circulates the products, which are really Department of Homeland Security bulletins, stressing the need for greater collaboration between law enforcement and private sector partners. The ubiquity of the 2016 Russian interference story as stated pretext for building out the censorship machine can't be overstated. It's analogous to how 9/11 inspired the expansion of the security state, basically. Like, if you were around in 9/11 and you saw what happened with what they did with the Patriot Act and everything else, it was, ridiculous. There was, a ton of legislation that just came in from on high, and it was all just approved because everyone was super nervous. And by the way, it was bipartisan. It wasn't just, well, we had Republicans in, so blah, blah, blah. I mean, like, Bush obviously took it too far. But, I mean, Joe Biden was one of the co-authors and co-writers, I believe, of the Patriot Act. So just another reason I love fucking Uncle Joe. And it was all nonsense. It was all nonsense. Here it says here the intelligence Office of Intelligence and Analysis, Russian malign influence, use of permissive social media platforms. We assess that Russian malign influencers probably will increasingly use U.S. social media platforms that offer more permissive operating environments. We base this assessment on the reduced effectiveness of Russian influence operations on established U.S. social media platforms and current Russian proxy activity on these growing US platforms. Our assessment also is based on the assumption that Russian malign influencers see operational advantages in sites with less active effort to ban false information, offensive language, and inauthentic behavior. While the DHS is in its products pans permissive social media for offering operational advantages to Russians, it also explains that the domestic violent extremist threat requires addressing what they call information gaps. FBI, in one case, sent over so many possible violative content reports, Twitter personnel congratulated each other in Slack for the monumental undertaking of reviewing them. There were multiple points of entry into Twitter for government flagged reports. This letter from Agent Chan to Roth references Teleporter, a platform through which Twitter could receive reports from the FBI. Now, this came out a little bit before the Twitter files. I believe it was done over on The Intercept. I think it was Li Fang that did that story. But the bottom line is, Facebook and Twitter were under so much pressure from the Democrats to basically deal with these pesky Republicans and election misinformation and then everything that came after it ahead of the midterms, that they created portals that the FBI and all these other entities could flag content, and it would just come through pre-flagged. It's high priority, and they had one for Facebook and they had one for Twitter, and Twitter's was called Teleporter. Reports also came from different agencies. Here, an employee recommends bouncing content based on evidence from Department of Homeland Security. And remember, bouncing is you just take it off the platform. That message says, given the evidence we received from the Department of Homeland Security, I lean towards bouncing the URL, bouncing the videos, given the accusations. State governments also flagged content. Twitter, for instance, received reports via the Partner Support Portal, an outlet created by the Center for Internet Security, a partner organization to the Department of Homeland Security. Why was no action taken? Below, you can see Twitter execs receiving an alert from California officials by way of our Partner Support Portal. They're debating on whether to act on the now infamous Trump tweet. This one here. So this was the tweet that Donald Trump put out. California hired a pure Sleepy Joe Democrat firm to count and harvest votes. No way Republicans get a fair shake. Lawyers, get started. GOP leader, California is in big trouble. Vote Trump and watch the greatest comeback of them all. Also, New York and Illinois. Go for it. The feds decided that required action. They communicated with Twitter employees, and see on this rather lengthy exchange here, I'll read you just a section of this. They are requesting feedback on the tweet and why Twitter didn't take any action. They added, ballots in California are only counted by local election officials in an open and transparent process. This tweet undermines voter confidence their votes will be fairly and properly counted. Please see our relevant election codes. A video was reported by the Election Integrity Project at Stanford, apparently on the strength of information from the Center of Internet Security. And in that message, it says, this is a very long and legal heavy video, but essentially it claims Pennsylvania election workers opened the inner envelopes of ballots before Election Day and called people to correct their ballots prior to Election Day. According to CIS, the video misrepresents Pennsylvania law, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court decision, and the affidavit shown in the video. Thoughts on how to handle this one? And then they added, the law doesn't prohibit curing. It prohibits curing prior to 7 on election day. The author misrepresents this by stating the officials can't contact voters, whereas they can't do so until pre-canvassing starts. The author misrepresents the PASC decision, that's the Supreme Court, by stating voters are not forbid from curing ballots. PASC simply stated the law didn't require officials to offer an opportunity to cure. On the affidavits, these folk were contacted about having an opportunity to cure a ballot. In none of the examples did the affidavit state the election official called them and said the voter-specific ballot needed curing. The author of the video misrepresented this and claimed otherwise. Now, if that's confusing, it's because the CIS is a Department of Homeland Security contractor and described itself as partners with the Cyber and Internet Security Agency, CISA, at the DHS. The Election Integrity Project is one of a series of government-affiliated think tanks that mass review content, a list that also includes the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensic Research Laboratory and the University of Washington Center for Informed Policy. The takeaway, what most people think of as the deep state, is really a tangled collaboration of state agencies, private contractors, and sometimes state-funded NGOs. The lines have become so blurred they are now meaningless. The remaining Twitter files will be released in due time, but we now move over to Barry Weiss and MD Schellenberger. So, just to wrap that up, and see what that essentially reveals. Basically, we can now safely say that Twitter, by and large, took its cues from all of the federal agencies it was willing to work with because it shared a common goal of ensuring that Democrats had no misinformation to deal with in terms of the election process. And understand, as a journalist and a purveyor of truth, I'm not somebody that supports misinformation. I don't want misinformation around the election process, but as I've said a billion times, America is a banana republic on steroids, and there is always going to be lies. What Twitter engaged in was they took their cues from partisan federal agencies, and they essentially tilted the playing field. The Dems still got to lie, and did, and we demonstrated that. Any Republican account that said even something as benign as go out and vote because if the Dems get in, it's going to be bad, that aged pretty well, didn't it, really? Those accounts were being banned and suppressed, right? So, why? And what does that mean in a broader context? Now, I know I saw people in the chat type in, how many fucking Twitter files are there? There's tons. I mean, like, we're up to 14 as of today, by the way. They keep pumping these Twitter files out in these stupid formats. And it's so much to go over, and I'm not going to ignore them. But I am going to take breaks from content in between. I'm going to do other things between going over them, because they're just simply too much. Like, it's, you know, and a lot of it is stuff that you already know.